Good morning and welcome. My name's Paul Swain, your host for today. I'm a HR consultant drawing on too many years of experience across multiple countries. In more recent years in HR leadership roles at recognisable brands such as Christian Dior Couture, Laser Clinics and the Dimmix Group. I'm passionate about helping HR leaders grow both professionally for their own careers and so they can unlock the benefit for the organisations they work for. The topic for today is timely and important. Does the C-suite value HR leaders? The title of the webinar is intentionally provocative. AbilityMap and everyone on this panel feels strongly and empathetically for the value that HR leaders bring to the C-suite. Our discussion is about teasing out how we can fast track getting there for the benefit of our HR leaders and the organisations they serve. Our hope is that by the end, you, the audience, will walk away at least with 3 actionable learnings that can help with this fast-tracking process. And we really do have the right panel for the job. So let me introduce our distinguished panelists today. We've got 2 CEO experienced panelists and 2 more in the HR profession side. So maybe they'll just give us a wave so you know which one is which. I'll introduce Patrick Tuttle first of all. Hi, Patrick, financial services CEO with a proven track record in optimising financial performance for key stakeholders, passionate about building and leading highly motivated management teams. Thanks, Patrick. Next, I'll go to Cameron Judson. Thanks, Cameron. Non-exec director, CEO and executive with 30+ years experience leading teams, managing change and delivering growth in large multi-site B2B and B2B services, including managed services, human capital consulting, intellectual property, human services and education. Next, we'll move to Cherie Mylordis. Hi, Cherie. That's Cherie, great. Expert in business transformation, innovation, leadership and culture, equips forward-thinking executives, leaders and change makers to amplify their impact. And then last, but certainly not in any way least, Helen Hovenga. So Helen currently works with the 2026 Victoria Commonwealth Games, bringing her extensive experience in capability building, HR transformation and organisation development, underpinning global growth. So let's get into it. We promised to draw back the curtain on the C-suite, so let's hear from the experts. So I'm going to go to the CEOs first and ask, maybe I'll start with Patrick, I introduced you first. So how do you perceive HR leaders and what do you want them to bring to the executive team and to shareholders?
Thanks, Paul, and hi, everyone. So I guess out of the gate, I can definitely say that as a CEO, I value HR leaders, so we can get that off the table. I'm not here to be critical. In fact, I see them as huge or an integral member of the businesses I've always run. And by that, I mean a member of the exec committee, you know, in the same way as I view the CFO, treasurer, COO, CIO, head of marketing in any large business. You know, the HR leader always has a seat at that table. And so like all members of the C-suite, you know, from my perspective, I always want them to have a deep understanding of the business and what makes it successful. You know, essentially the reason for being and why our business does things differently and what sets it apart from our peers and competitors. So I'd say I have a fairly high expectation around HR leaders really getting in and understanding what makes the business tick, particularly in terms of the underlying culture and the types of people that succeed within the business. I must say most of my experience comes from within the Pepper Financial Services Group, which I was Australian CEO and co-global CEO for 10 years, and where ultimately the business spanned 8 countries across Australia, Asia and Europe. And because we were a very fast growing business, you know, we grew through mergers and acquisitions. So it was a fast paced environment. Yeah. We were often hiring key people across multiple jurisdictions. So our group HR leader was someone that really understood the global business and was instrumental in helping us recruit key people ultimately, which were not, you know, a great cultural fit. And I think she developed very strong working relationships with the country heads in each of those businesses and the senior executive teams on the ground. And I guess from my perspective, by doing the work, she was critical in being able to understand what drove kind of sound recruitment decisions within the business, as well as ensuring that our ongoing training and development strategies were supportive of the very high growth environment in which we operated, because the business was really characterized by constant change. So we needed an HR leader who could adapt with the business and be flexible to the ever-changing needs of the business. And ultimately, just to sum up, Pepper grew from being an Australian-only business of less than about 100 employees in late 2010 to a business operating in 8 countries with over 2,500 employees by mid-2017. So this had a lot to do with making some key strategic hires in critical roles, both at a group level and in country. And HR was a huge part of that success.
Yeah, that's a lot of people in a lot of locations in a small amount of time, relatively. Hey.
Oh, absolutely. And it was really, we were an opportunistic kind of buyer of businesses as the GFC kind of destroyed a lot of financial services businesses in Europe. It was an opportunity for others to step in and fill the void, and that's what we did. So we grew very quickly.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Patrick. And then over to you, Cameron. Kind of the same question, really. So how do you perceive HR leaders, and what do you want them to bring to the exec team and to shareholders?
Thanks, Paul. And I'll build on kind of Patrick's points without restating. I'm equally a true believer in the importance that a leader of the function plays in the business. I always think about them wearing 2 hats. One is the trusted advisor to the CEO. The person, the executive, will have the conversation with the CEO that no one else will. And then equally a leader amongst peers. And I was thinking about takeaways for today, Paul, and I always think about the role in kind of 2 dimensions. One is the 5 Ps, which I'll explain.
Yeah.
And the other one is LCT, which I'll explain. So when I think about the best leaders I've worked with in this role across a number of different highly people-dependent service industries that I've been involved in, the 5 Ps is the best leaders connect people to purpose. Wake up all day, every day thinking about the people experience. I wake up all day, every day thinking, how can I connect the purpose and the people to the other 3 Ps, which for me are, how do we drive productivity, performance, and profit? And if that's a not-for-profit, that's probably a, how do we drive a surplus to serve more of our customers?
Yeah.
And then equally, the best leaders I've ever worked with in this space wake up all day, every day, building on probably Patrick's point, thinking about 3 things that count that set all businesses apart, which is leadership, culture, and talent. So the best leaders in this function wake up thinking we have to connect all of our people to purpose. There's a business outcome we want to achieve through people, and then we're defined by having standards or beliefs around the leadership, the culture that is core to this organisation, and the talent we invite into the organisation to be part of it.
Yeah, that's great, and I'm sure we'll come around to your 5 Ps again, because that is something that people can specifically take away from this and start to utilise that. So we'll definitely come back around to that, Cameron.
Thanks, Bob.
We'll move on now to Cherie. So that's sort of the CEO perspective. On the people and culture and HR perspective, Cherie, where are you at on your side of the seesaw?
Oh, look, I couldn't agree more. Like, it's absolutely critical to have HR at the table and to be that trusted advisor, because they are really that enabler to really help the organisation thrive. If you don't get the best out of your people, you can't run an organisation, no matter what you do. And I really love what Cameron said about connecting people to purpose, because that draws on that intrinsic motivation that inspires them to get up every day and show up to work and try and do their best work because they believe in what the organisation stands for. So yeah, that really resonates with me. And talent and attracting and retaining talent is an absolutely critical role, because you can have a great culture, but you've got to continue to maintain that culture. So every single hire, every single decision is essential. And that's not just up to HR, of course, that's up to the business leadership to really articulate what is it that they need and how are they going to, continue to thrive and evolve and change as an organisation. So it has to be a collaboration. You can't outsource that to HR. So really important that there's business ownership in the full spectrum of, people, finding them, attracting them, retaining them.
Yeah, great. And so a big thumbs up from Patrick there, and that aligns perfectly with exactly the point about not only a trusted advisor to the CEO, but a leader amongst their peers as well. So yeah, that's great. And then we'll bring our final panelist in, Helen. So you're very much on the people side and actively working in people and culture leadership right now. So to round out those views, what do you have to say?
So I guess what I've heard a lot about is about the vision of great HR leaders and the difference they make within an organisation. And I think, you know, if I think about this as an influencing piece that I think is quite important, then we understand that the vision of, you know, people thriving, flourishing, really contributing to an organisation, the fact that people are so important. And I think all of us, no doubt, on this webinar know the value of that, which is really important. What I thought that I'd also add to that is the burning platform. So, you know, if you think about this as a change piece that is about, the vision is very exciting, but there's also the burning platform that people need to understand. This is actually not a choice anymore in organisations if they want to be able to thrive and flourish. And there's significant risk that's coming about. And I'm sure that CEOs and boards would understand some of the risks that are starting to particularly rise. And it's making boards and CEOs more interested in the people and culture function in itself, and ensuring that people and culture is sitting at the table. So just some things that are kind of meant to scare you a bit, but might influence that decision making. So number one, if I think about the Victorian new workplace manslaughter charges, where if there are workplace deaths, if there are suicides due to a poor environment in a workplace, there are people that will have jail time as a result of that. And if CEOs and boards aren't taking notice of the importance of well-being amongst the health and safety focus that does already exist in organisations, there's a significant risk in that space. So that's just one. The second one is the conversation around hybrid working. Everyone's talking about it. I know chairs of boards are wondering what's going on. I know CEOs really want people in an office. And I know talent are saying, I don't want to be in an office all the time. And so how are we approaching hybrid working? How can we make it really purposeful? And I can tell you again, from a risk perspective, if you don't get this right, you're not going to have great collaboration, but you're also not going to get the talent that you need into your organisation if you don't offer some sort of flexibility around working where that's feasible in the workplace. So talent, hybrid working. The third one, the ESG focus we know is happening. So environmental, social governance. It's a huge conversation at the moment. It really is giving organisations a sort of green credentials. Some are ticking boxes, but the reality is the P&C team really help with the social responsibility element, ensuring that employees are engaged, that diversity and belonging is high on the agenda of the approach that's being taken in the workplace, and also the remuneration components and accountability in that space. So that's ESG is the third. Fourth one, culture. The Robo-Debt Royal Commission is repeating to me what I heard a few years ago with the misconduct in banking, superannuation and financial services and the Royal Commission that was going on there. It's the culture within an environment where people were not speaking up, they weren't saying what needed to be said, and the environment that was created by the organisation was one in which people were quiet or were quietened, and people are being sacked who speak up, who are courageous. And this is the space that people and culture need to take. They need to help to create an environment in which people can speak up. So psychological safety is also a critical piece. The last one I'll say is millennials. It's a whole other world. There's a new way of working coming. If we're not ready for the future with the workforce that we are going to have as our baby boomers and Gen Xers start to exit the workplace, if we're not ready for that environment, we will not be ready for the future of work. And this is another critical factor and a place that people and culture really step in and come to the fore. When they're heard, they can help you with these critical matters, and it's very, very important. The last thing I'll just add, COVID response. If you look at the HR role, when COVID hit, I can tell you, I was on a network of HR directors and we spoke all day, all the time with each other about what we needed to do, what we needed to put in place. The agility, the respect I have for the HR colleagues I have and the work they had to do across organisations, with the changes that were happening, legislative changes, legal changes constantly happening, that agility is just another factor that says if you don't have HR sitting at a table when it comes to decisions, there's a huge risk to the organisation. I'll come to other points a bit later on, but that's particularly important, I think, to make sure people understand why P&C need a position at the table.
Great. So thank you for that, Helen. So there's a bit of talk there about the risk and consequence, or the stick, if you want. And then there was a bit of talk, I think, also about the carrot and the type of carrots you need to grow an organisation from 100 people in Australia only to 2,700 people globally in really turbulent times. So we've got sort of the risk and consequence side, and then the positive revenue driving growth side to the argument. So I'm going to go now in a little bit of a direction about where some of the questions are taking us, and thank you for asking those. So there's a good acknowledgement about the 5 Ps and LCT, and we might repeat those a couple of times. The questioner draws a really great point, and that is that it seems that there is a mix of art and science, I think is what they're saying. So there's sort of art and intuition, and there's also HR speak, but not always business language. So if we draw back around to the HR seat at the table, if HR teams are using HR speak, and HR leaders in particular using HR speak and not business language, is that an issue when it comes to trying to get it right? Maybe I might come back now to the CEO. So maybe Cameron or Patrick, if you've got a view on this.
Oh, look, my only comment here is any speak, if it's HR, the CFO talking in code, frankly, it's not helpful. You need to be speaking plain English so that people get exactly what you mean. So if that means simplifying, that type of stuff, I'm always for it. Because you want to make sure that the C-suite who sit alongside the HR leader are entirely in sync with what they mean, as opposed to kind of guessing. So often it's just clear communications, make sure you get better outcomes, in my experience.
Yeah, understood. And is there a role there, Patrick, for HR leaders, whatever you call them, chief people officers, whatever it might be, to sort of speak the language of the business, but also help the C-suite and the CEO understand some of the language that they need in their lexicon when it comes to the area of people?
Totally, because often HR leaders feel like, and quite rightly sometimes set upon, by the other leaders. There are, in my experience, the HR leader is a real advisor to the CEO in the context of, I always wanted my HR head to call out kind of bad behaviour or issues where they felt members of the C-suite were lacking in terms of people, talent management, or frankly, we're just simply, in my vernacular, old school in the way they approached a lot of this stuff. Yeah. And I always wanted them to speak up and not be afraid to kind of at least share that with me so that we could address it there and then. And in a fast-growing culture, that was critical. Yeah. Because either letting that stuff fester or making a bad hire in a business like that can set it back, 12 to 18 months. And frankly, because we grew so successfully, I think we were successful in avoiding some of those major roadblocks, but it was all part of open communication and calling out behavior when you see it to correct it. And that means making an environment where, I think Helen was saying, making it permissible for people to call that stuff out and not to take it personally, but to take it in the right way so that you are moving the business forward. Yeah,
and I think what I'm hearing from you there, Patrick, is to an extent, because you're wanting to hear about yourself from your HR lead, and I think Cameron touched on a similar thing. You're probably asking your HR lead to be quite brave as well, huh?
Oh, totally. But you've also got to create the environment for them. There's some CEOs that I know that frankly don't create that environment, and that's a real problem for them because they're never going to get the best out of their people, including the HR leader, because they don't make themselves accessible or open to that. So you really need, the CEO needs to look at themselves and have a degree of self-awareness to allow that to happen.
Yeah. And if that culture's not right, my view of it, and I'm going to come to you now, Cameron, is you're leaving money on the table, because I've heard you say before that the people are the business.
Yeah, I 100% believe that. And to build on Patrick's point, I think the authenticity in the relationship between the CEO and the HR leader is critical. And in my experience, I've worked in some very much sales-driven organisations where there's this respect for performance in a number, but the organisation is also looking for respect in performance around behaviours. So I've put very capable people up against the wall and, in Cameron's language, shot them because there's complete incongruence with what we say is important around here in terms of leadership culture and behaviours. And I think that's my other experience, Patrick, to build on your point. They're the moments to define, I think, the relationship the CEO has with the HR lead. And they're the moments to define the culture of the organisation, because people think, wow, he or she is serious about the purpose and the values underpin the purpose. And so, again, my experience is that works really well, and there can be a lot of noise, Helen, I'm sure, around risk in the organisation as and when that happens, and you can feel that shudder out across the whole organisation. But people a week or two later say, wow, I now buy into that value statement because I've seen it lived.
Yeah, look, I agree with that. If you let that stuff, that bad behaviour go uncorrected, you end up with a culture that, frankly, you deserve, because you need to stand up for the values of business and what you stand for as a CEO, I think, in order to get the support of HR and all the C-suite for that matter.
Great. So I'm going to move over to big thumbs up from Cameron. So I'm going to move over to the HR team now. So Helen, I think I'll come back to you first. There's a little bit in there around bravery, and you've obviously got to balance the risk side. And there's a couple of comments in the Q&A that really note that that's a good call out, especially the robo-debt example around culture. And in fact, every time you see an organisation get annihilated in the press, they nearly always then refer to the culture of the organisation that either allowed it or drove it. So what do you think the barrier is, Helen, for people like yourself who are in those lead roles, who are required to be the trusted advisor to the CEO, almost the leader of the executive team, ultimately accountable for setting the culture, even though I fully accept that they can't own every aspect of it, and that's very much shared. But what are the challenges and barriers for people in your position?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of it, if I look at the standard that says we can win over people by continuing to argue the same thing we've always argued as HR professionals, it sometimes doesn't work, right? So if I go in and I meet a CEO who doesn't kind of get that talent's really important, well-being's important, engagement's important. They know that they want high performance, but they might miss the nuance of those sorts of aspects. Then I need to make sure that I'm taking it from their perspective and argue in a different way, right? So, which is why I started with presenting risks, because sometimes people who are not aware of the sort of, that optimistic view of how people and culture can make a difference can be woken up by the wake-up call of the sort of risk aspect. But there are a number of things that I think are really critical. The first thing that I do when I come into a role and I'm working with a C-suite executive or a number of them is to make sure I get to know them. I need to know their mission, their personal mission. What is their purpose, not only for the role that they do, but their purpose in being in the organisation and what drives them. If it's financials, then I speak financial language with them to influence them on the things that we need to do. So here's a few steps I would suggest. Number one, meet them, make sure you spend some time with them and really understand their mission. Tailor your approach to what their needs are. It's not about your needs. It's not about what you see. It's actually about what they see and what they need, because they are the organisation and they are the organisational leaders. Doesn't mean you don't have your own perspective and you share it, but it means you're speaking their language, you're tailoring to their approach. Secondly, give them what they want so you can give them what they need. It's a saying I use all the time. Give them what they want so you can give them what they need. It builds your credibility. It gives them the answers they're looking for. It gives them the instant answers, but it gives you a foot in the door to broader conversations about what they really need. Thirdly, understand their mission. I've mentioned that. Be commercial about your solutions, really focused on the business outcomes that you're looking for. Be good at what you do. Obviously, credibility, knowledge is really, really important, and building trust, so doing what you say you're going to do, and all of those standard elements. But I think one of the most important things is actually owning the space and filling the space that you're given. So you need to believe and know that you belong, and you need to be courageous. So I think that's particularly important. I think it can often be the case that you sort of shrink back a bit. You might take your time, bide your time. I think it's really important that you're stepping forward constantly. It's scary, and it can be sometimes risky, but of course, I think it's an important part to be credible as a PNC leader, as you mentioned, as opposed to a PNC partner. Leadership takes courage, and I think that's it's very important to be prepared to step forward and take the space that you're given. So those are probably some of the critical aspects that would make a difference to being heard and having a say. The last thing I will add, I can tell what matters to an organisation by the structure they put in place. When they have a HR person reporting into the COO or the CFO or in an operational role, the fact is they're not interested in strategy, culture. They're not as focused on that as it could be. When they put them in the C-suite, they send a message to the workforce and to the organisation, to the board, that says our people are our number one asset, and that is a very critical piece.
Great. So if we have time, we'll come back around to that one, because that comes up often and in many different ways with HR leaders about this seat at the table and how the structure both informs that and also publicises where you stand. Now, you drew quite nicely together using that word courage for HR leaders, and it's actually very much what Cameron and Patrick were saying too. So if I think about the courage to move things forward, and we've got a good point from Lorna in the questions, who says there seems to be a theme around leading with curiosity in this. So if you're going to move forward with curiosity and courage, Cherie, this is really in your world now. How does that link into how you see this?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely key. And as everyone has said so far, people are the business, people are the X factor, they're your key differentiator. So really, I think, I see amazing examples where the C-suite and, the Chief People Officer, HR, they really are joined at the hip in terms of championing, the steps towards the vision. I mean, transformation has to happen all the time now. No organisation can guarantee their success into the future, not one. So unless you're constantly looking at transformation and innovation, you may have a finite runway ahead of you. And so, if you're really embracing transformation, innovation, and if you're really saying, we encourage ideas from anywhere. If you've got that bold purpose of what you stand for, what's the impact you're trying to have in the world as an organisation, and then you empower, you give your people space, as Helen said, to step into that. You don't micromanage them. You give them that space and you see what they come up with. Extraordinary things can happen. And then that leadership team can then shine a light on where those little pockets of brilliance are happening. And then that creates ripples where more people want to step into that. I just wanted to add a little framework to the acronym. So in addition to the 5 Ps, I'd like to add my 3 Ds. So my 3 Ds stand for dare, ditch, and dial. And it's really because I believe we're at a signpost in the evolution of work. And we have a choice now. We're coming out of the pandemic. We're in this state of flux. We're looking to the future. What does the future of work look like? I actually believe that the future of work is already here. You just need to know where to look. But in terms of those 3 Ds, so the first one stands for dare. And it's about purpose. It's what do we dare to be? What do we dare to do in the world? And having that really bold, audacious purpose that is almost impossible to reach, but it sets that North Star, it sets that bold, audacious vision that you're going for. And it's not just words on a page, it's how you show up as a leadership team and you live it every day and you role model it and you shine a light on where that's happening. So that's my first D, dare. My second D, which I think is so important, is ditch. So we need to ditch those outdated work practices if we can create that space to dial up those more contemporary, those better ways of working. So, you know, endless meetings, emails, all the bureaucracy. I interviewed 100 leaders last year on what's stopping people from doing their best work, and less than a third said they are.
Yeah.
And the people that said they or their people are not, that lack of clarity, that organizational confusion, that micromanagement and decisions just taking too long and involving too many people is really frustrating people and holding them back. So if we can ditch those outdated work practices, we can free up space. A client I'm currently working for had a super ditch day last year, and it's a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate, and they encourage people to create teams of super ditchers. They had branding, they had a big sort of fanfare at the beginning, and 1,700 ideas were pitched on things to ditch. And then we created a live dashboard so that each business unit could have that healthy competition and see how many ditching ideas were presented by your area and how many are you actually ditching. So those long procurement processes that drive people crazy, you know, some of those things that's just like, this is the way we've always done things. Let's question those and let's encourage our people to question those. And then my third D is for dial, and it's about dialing up those better ways of working, inspired by what extraordinary organizations are doing. And so it's a simple framework and there's a lot underneath it, but it's something that people can latch onto. And if you're prepared to inspire your people, encourage them, and as I said, shine a light on where you see the good happening, that's really how you can have a thriving community within your organization.
Great. Okay, so we've got a 5 Ps, a 3 Ds, and an LCT. We said you would have 3 takeaways at the end of these actionable ones. We're also going to, I think, set a record for answering all questions as we go, because somebody has said here that they think these should become LinkedIn articles. So I'm pretty confident we can ensure that those get turned into LinkedIn articles. We've got 10 minutes to go, so I'm going to use the questions as a Q&A now and direct those questions. There's one which I will come to the CEOs around this one, but there's a question that says, goes right back to something that Helen said earlier about hybrid working. Why do CEOs want talent in the office? If there's anything to add to that, I'll go to the CEOs because it's asked specifically of them. But one of the things I can share with you, Lorna, is really that there's abundant evidence that people who work in their best location, at their best time, in their best way, do their best work. So individually, it's fabulous. There's lots of evidence to support it. And there is quite a lot of evidence on the contrary that says it's been really damaging to team and group and functional and organizational work, and there's quite a detriment to that. So that's your brief answer, but maybe Patrick or Cameron, do you have a view on that?
Yeah, look, I'm all for hybrid working, but I also know the benefit of getting people together, at least, you know, periodically. You know, it doesn't have to be every day, but you know, for teams to really work effectively together, you need some time together, FaceTime together. So I believe in both. You know, we drive an organisation that allows, I think, a 3+2 type, you know, working from home in the office. You know, that can vary depending on the role. But I'm still a big believer, particularly for young people and grads that are joining, you know, larger firms. They do benefit from having some of that FaceTime and learning with people in the room. And I know that from my own kids who are graduates in, you know, big firms, and they were dying to actually meet, you know, live people instead of just being online. So I think it works both ways. So I'm supportive, but I think you need some of both.
Yeah, and we've had it thrust on us, right? Because of COVID, and I don't want to turn this conversation back around to COVID, but we had something we weren't ready for really thrust on us, and we haven't quite found the balance yet. Hey, Cameron, anything to add on that one specifically?
The only thing I'd add is, to build on Patrick's last point, I think the benefit of being together is definitely cultural, but I think the other benefit that everyone discounts as enormous value is just learning by osmosis. It's the informal learning as opposed to structured learning from peer, a colleague, someone senior to me. And what I always refer to as like the 4-legged meeting. Any meeting with 4 legs rather than 2, someone learns more than doing it on their own. Thanks.
Indeed. Yeah, good, great one. So I'm going to use our last question that we've got, which is from Sean. Thanks, Sean. And I'm going to just give our panelists maybe 1 to 2 minutes only each, or we'll run out of time. And what do our panelists find that HR leaders need to quickly learn when they join the C-suite? So they take that first step into being around the big table. Is it hard numbers? Is it storytelling? Is it business strategy? What is it? I think I'm going to come to Cherie first.
It's that purpose and vision. Where does the organisation want to go, and how do they want to really, stand out and either continue to be leaders or become leaders in their field? I think HR also needs to unlock the superpowers, like at the C-suite table, but even beyond that, if we can really identify, what are people's innate strengths, those superpowers, and connect that to the purpose and really recognise that, that's where you can really get another level of engagement and, people thriving.
Yeah, understood. That's great. And then maybe I will switch on to the CEO side of the seesaw. So Cameron, I'm going to come to you next.
I'd like to build on Helen's point. You've got to own the space. You've got to have something you believe in. Hopefully that's you believe in the purpose of the organisation. Hopefully you believe in the 5 Ps and the LCT. Yeah. And just own it and go for it. Like, it's like playing first grade. You've been picked.
Yeah.
Play.
Yeah. Now it comes right back to how we positioned this whole piece today. Maybe the term partner is overused, and the business leaders, they're looking for a leader. Hey, great. Another thumbs up from Cameron. Cameron, it's your love language. That's a big thumbs up.
Paul, if I can just add,
please do.
I guess when it comes to this sort of change in what P&C really need to learn pretty quickly, I totally agree. The vision and direction, to me, having a North Star of what the organisation is there for, what we're aiming for, impacts on my everyday decision making. It impacts on my everyday conversation and communication. And when I'm developing policies, systems, processes, I'm always keeping that in mind. So what's the culture of the organisation? How can I reinforce it through all of our systems, all of our people systems? How can we reinforce it in every meeting we have? How can we make sure that everyone really fully owns the culture and the values? And so a couple of approaches that I take, and this is a few steps to take note of. Firstly, make sure those values are really meaningful. If they're not meaningful to people, ditch them and change them. There's a ditch of one of the Ds. Change them and make them meaningful. Secondly, create a from and to. So what's the current culture? What's the culture we're aiming for? And I can tell you boards love that. If they've got this quick one-pager that says this is what we currently are, this is what we're aspiring to, it can really make a difference. And the third point I'd make is around psychological safety. I think that goes to one of the questions as well. If you haven't read The Fearless Organisation by Amy Edmondson, I would encourage you to do so. We would talk about the robo-debt example. We need to create a fearless organisation that requires really great candid feedback, constantly being a part of what you do and ensuring that you face into the challenges as well. That takes courage for everyone, not just P&C.
Yeah, understood. Well, that's good that you came in, because I was going to come to you next anyway, and your answer was in 2 halves there, Helen. And the first half, what you seemed like you were describing, you might be disrupting Cameron's model now. We might need to have another P. You were describing being practical, right?
Yeah, and I started this new role, not that long ago, and I looked for a book that said, your first 90 days, and I read it, and I'd already read it before, and I realised why I had to reread it, because it actually didn't give me practical, what do you do, first. So of course I've just developed my own approach to it. And I think when we speak at these sorts of things, we need to help people know, first you do this, then you do this, then you do this. And I think you've just got to make it real and practical all the time, simplify it, don't make it too complex.
Yeah, great. Good, thank you. And last but by no means least on this point, I'll go to Patrick.
Yeah, I think if you're the HR leader in the exec committee of a business, I think first and foremost, you, like all those execs, need to understand the vision and values of that company. But then from an HR perspective, I think you need to be able to identify the kind of traits and characteristics that drive the successful leaders in that business and be able to distill that and drive that through the rest of the organisation with the CEO, because that's how you actually build the culture from within, and as the HR leader helps drive it alongside the CEO, as opposed to just being a kind of cost centre that I think to Helen said, you have, if HR is layered below the COO or the CFO, that's a very bad sign. So if you're in that situation, get out of it, talk to the CEO and make sure that changes, because that will not, deliver the right outcome.
Yeah, exactly right. And I think it shows, Patrick, a real fundamental lack of understanding in leadership as to the value that people bring. Because if people are the business, exactly to Cameron's point, then if people are the business and they are not represented at the highest level, then
it's a
you're not
bad sign.
you're not going to have the friction, right, that promotes that agenda. Good. Okay. Well, we are about to finish our time, so I'm going to do a last-minute check for questions. We've got no more questions, but we are getting some great feedback from our attendees. So I will say, on behalf of the attendees, using one of the comments, a quality panel, couldn't agree more. Great discussion and thanks. So specifically, thanks to our CEO side, Patrick and Cameron, and also thank you to our HR people and culture side in Cherie and Helen. Your takeaways were your 5 or maybe now 6 Ps, who knows? We had the 3 Ds, we've got LCT, there was talk about courageousness and curiosity from HR leads. So I'm sure that our AbilityMap that are on this call have got loads of follow-up articles. We'll no doubt do some further webinars on some of these themes, and lots more content to come from the AbilityMap team, who I'd like to say thank you for putting this together and hosting it today. So thank you to all our panelists, thank you to everybody who's joined, and from AbilityMap, thank you. Thanks, everybody.